Welcome, everybody, to a new episode of the new Lyre show. We're back for more timeless art and poetry and discussion. And we're here with Adam Sedia, our regular contributor, lawyer, poet, composer. Welcome, Adam.
Good to be back.
So, yeah, we're back. And like we said, we're going to be making this a more regular thing, which feels necessary. At the same time, it's something we want to do, which is nice because it's fun, but it's also necessary given the current sad state of our culture and its quote unquote culture wars, which is, we've talked about this, but I don't think we can really get away from it. The unfortunate thing with the culture wars is they haven't really done a great job of offering any kind of genuine, viable, or timeless culture on the whole, largely, with some nice exceptions, but overall. And I think the only real remedy for that is new great works of timeless art and beauty. So that's the kind of thing that we want to just have fun exploring here. So we have a selection of poems, and we're just going to talk about them, and we just want to highlight some worthwhile poets that should be read, should be studied, the kind of stuff that you can carry around with you as you go about your day. And when you find a nice moment, it's really a great thing to be able to find or create that moment of quiet meditation, if you will, where we can read a poem and get a little reminder that there's something more there, even if we have all these distractions that kind of, keep our attention away from other things.
And what I would add to that is the poems we'll be reading are living poets. They're poets of our own day, people who live in this world and experience the same current things all of us do.
Right.
We talk about timelessness a lot, and it's important to emphasize that the poets of 200, 500, 3,000 years ago express the same sentiments and have the same human nature we do today. But I think there's more of an immediate connection with living poets. And most importantly, it emphasizes that poetry is not something of the past. It's not something etched in marble stones in far off cities. It's with us today still.
Right. And that's really a thing, right? Because there's a lot of people hearkening back to some golden age, which is always a thing, right? There's always a golden age of poetry, a golden age of religion, a golden age of philosophy. But I would point out, and I mean, there's better and worse times. There's no argument there. Interestingly, some of the worst times tend to actually bring out pretty good poetry, right? Because people have to go deeper, and they don't have that anesthetizing effect that a society with a lot of abundance and entertainment and shows and stuff to distract can really offer. So it does force a kind of deeper or brings to our attention a deeper spiritual and a longing for beauty, goodness, truth, which it's easier to forget when we're just constantly, bombarded with the rah-rah and all that. So, yeah, I started doing some readings on Twitter. We're doing some timeless poetry readings there, better late than never, to bring poems to life. And so this show is where we can bring it all together, though, in a long form format, talk about things and just muse a bit and have a bit of fun. So with that said, Adam, the first poem that you would like to discuss.
Oh, so you're going to make me go first. Well, I have a good one. I have a good one picked. This is by one of my favorite, and I think one of the best living poets we have, um, Dana Gioia, a name that will be familiar to many. Um, Needs no introduction, renowned not just poet, but professor, translator, and poet laureate of California. Don't know how he managed that one. Um, so, what I'm going to pick is a poem called The Road. Would you like me to read that one?
I'll read it and then
Okay,
we'll
very
let
good.
you
You will be our bard for the day.
we'll let you tell us why you
Okay.
this one stood out. And I mean, we both have the book. I had encouraged Adam to get this copy because it's uh, uh, there's a lot of good examples here. I mean, they're more than examples, but
Well, this is like a go-to book for Dana Gioia poems. He has several published volumes, and this is like a best of selection, and it's not too thick, so it's a nice reference to have.
yes. So this is called The Road. He sometimes felt that he had missed his life by being far too busy looking for it. Searching the distance, he often turned to find that he had passed some milestone unaware, and someone else was walking next to him. First friends, then lovers, now children and the wife. They were good company, generous, kind, but equally bewildered to be there. He noticed then that no one chose the way. All seemed to drift by some collective will. The path grew easier with each passing day, since it was worn and mostly sloped downhill. The road ahead seemed hazy in the gloom. Where was it he had meant to go? And with whom? Hmm.
Well, the first thing that jumps out to me about this poem is that it's a sonnet. Um, it doesn't have the strict, and I'll say it's a Petrarchan sonnet. It doesn't have the strict rhyme scheme we're used to reading about in textbooks, but it has the octave and the sestet, and there's a rhyme scheme that's confined within each. So this is definitely a sonnet. But what struck me perhaps even more was what it describes and what it appeals to. You know, all of us, I think, no matter where we are in our life, have the sense of we lose the forest for the trees. We get so distracted by immediate plans and plans for our career, our life, that we lose sight of the actual art of living life.
Mm.
And as we age, and we can I can speak to this as I get less young and drift towards middle age. Um, it's easier to stop caring and give up things. The road sloping downhill, I think, is a wonderful metaphor for the mood, the way life flows once you reach a certain age.
Mm.
Because you're just everything. It's that old expression: everything's downhill from here.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, and this is the kind of poem, right? I think it's going to take on more meaning over time, right? The great thing about a great poem is I think you can go back to it at different points in your own life, and you're going to see things that you didn't before, or there's more nuance there, right, than there was when we read it when we were perhaps younger, and for some reason seemed to think we had it all figured out or whatnot.
Well, I mean, but I think there's even when you're younger, you experience this sometimes. You know, I'm not gonna lie. I just turned 39 last month. Um, but when I was closer to your age or even younger, I started thinking, oh, you know, my 20s are coming to an end. Where did the time go? You
Mm-hmm.
know, oh, I graduated, you know, university, then law school. Where did the time go? I mean, I think all of us, even when we're young, if we're thinking about where we are and not just lost in the pleasures of the moment, we have this thought. So this is not just a poem for old people or for the aging.
Yeah, and I mean, I would say he noticed then that no one chose the way. All seemed to drift by some collective will. I think that's a very nice line because as much as we'd like to think we're in control, right? Oftentimes, the greatest lessons that we're going to learn, number one, aren't the lessons that we intend on learning. They're the lessons that sort of life teaches us. And we can choose to learn them and receive the wisdom or to keep trying to have it our way, which I mean, there's countless stories on how that works out. But there's also today, it makes me think of this cult of self-actualization, right? Where everybody has to become this fully self-actualized person. And there is some good to that, but in our modern culture, there's a tendency to overemphasize the self, right? And in the extreme form, right? The extreme end of that is the Luciferian idea, right? Which is the worship of self, right? Do what thou willst. I mean, which there's a lot of like,
Aleister Crowley, yes.
yeah, and then there's a lot of like Hollywood cartoonish depictions of this kind of evil stuff, or like plastic devil horns, and people are all losing their minds. But like, there's also the danger of where you had this with R.D. Laing and these social engineers, the idea of the politics of the family, and leave your family. The family was this control system. Love was a system of control, and for people to become their fully self-actualized self, right, they had to break away from everything that had anchored them down. And I say this because now he noticed that no one chose the way. All seemed to drift by some collective will. There's a certain, I think, wisdom in that line, in the recognition that we're not fully in control of everything. And part of the wisdom is embracing certain higher laws, right? And sort of, I mean, if we're saying it in a funny way, falling in line,
Yeah.
but embracing the higher plan that the universe has for all of us. And there's a mystery there, right? There is a joy there. And, people are always after mystery and excitement, but then, there's different kinds. You could join a mystery cult, or you could, that's not new, right? That's not a new thing. Or you could figure out, you could get acquainted with this deeper mystery of your soul, right? And that everybody has a soul.
Well,
And
what is the mystery cult really? It's kind of the opposite. It's not an acknowledgement of that something is a mystery. It's a claim to hold knowledge that others don't, and therefore a way to exercise power. A
right,
real mystery is a recognition that there are things that are beyond our capabilities as human beings with five limited senses to experience or detect, and to accept our limitations. And you know we can this is
yeah,
Lao Tzu. This is the essence of Taoism. You could also say there's in the Western tradition, there it's surrendering to the will of God. This is all over the world, and that's a recurring theme, and I think we see that here captured in that little phrase in the poem.
right. And I mean, see, the only problem with this kind of podcast is technically we could talk about this for the whole show.
Yeah.
And I mean, this would always be a 5 hour show, and we'd never get anything else done. Because yeah, I think the thing about a great poem is it is pregnant with meaning. You can sort of get into all the lines and muse about all the implications, and I mean the implications are endless. I mean that's part of the nature of something that touches on a deeper transcendent truth, right? You can always unearth more from it. So I think we'd leave that for this one. And I mean, again, it's a great collection of poems. We'll be talking more about these kind of poems, and I think now we will change the pace. We're going to keep changing the pace. So I'm actually going to read one by a young lady who is featured in our coming issue of New Lyre, and her name is Susan Botsit, and the poem is called Stars. I'm just pulling it up here. It was here, but okay, so this one is called Stars by Susan Botsit, who is a student in creative writing at the University, St. Mary's University, I believe. So, Stars. I lie awake at night and count the stars that cluster, cluttering the sky in mind with numbers vast and overwhelming. Mars pretends debilitating doubt, unkind anxiety, distrusting each unwise decision made. Regrets yet pile and grow with every passing second. Lists surmise a wasted life, designed to reach plateau. You lie beside me, hand in hand. Your warmth gets passed from fingers clasped and radiates desire. Your stillness penetrates the storm and guides me back into your arms, and creates the space to realize doubts are wasted hours we're meant to spend together under stars. Also a sonnet. A rather nice one. Is this the first time you're hearing this one, Adam?
I read it, but I can't find. I think you'd sent it to me, but
it's on the Chain Muse as well, I believe.
Okay.
So I'll let you find it, and I'll if you want. It's on the Chain Muse if you search it. But
how do you spell her last name?
If you just type Stars into the search,
okay, sure.
Chain Muse, it'll be like the first one.
All right, let me do that.
But pretty much, I mean, I think there's a lot. Part of I think the idea of timeless art, or I mean, this is I think something I was thinking about. A theme can be revisited in many different ways, right? If we think of the greatest composers, poets, artists, there's this idea today of originality, almost like a cult of originality, where everything has to be new, and modernism didn't help with the whole, make it new injunctions kind of thing. But stars, it's not a new theme, right? How do you write a poem about the stars? Hasn't that already been written about? Like, haven't we heard enough about the stars kind of thing?
Forever. Forever.
Yeah,
and there are those who would say it's cliche, it's overused.
But the reality is, how does the idea of a great artistic genius is how do they treat a familiar theme and actually unearth something completely new, right? Something original. And sometimes it's even just a small touch, right? Like even in sculpture, you can have the same figure depicted over and over, but sometimes it's just a slightly different treatment or portrayal of the gaze, right? And the stance, the posture, and you can communicate a qualitatively different idea. So I think the same thing goes with a poem, and we see this throughout, the medieval legends being revisited. Shakespeare, most of his plays were based on stories that, well, almost virtually all, if not all, were based on stories that he didn't write. Some of them were hundreds of years old. But
and some of them were actual history, Antony and Cleopatra, Henry the Fourth, Henry the Fifth.
Yeah, and so what was key was the treatment and how he was able to unearth so much richness and depth and irony that caught our mind in sort of took it out of time, really, and allowed us to contemplate certain deeper transcendent truths. From thence, I think, comes its power, that even if it's something from thousands of years ago, Antony and Cleopatra, read today, even if it's a story about something that happened thousands of years ago, it's full of it's full of insight, it's full of beauty, and it's full of so many fine things.
Well, and lessons to teach too. I mean, Shakespeare wrote a play out of it, and then um, there's been operas about it, and then Elizabeth Taylor was in a movie about it, and now they made an awful Netflix series out of it as well.
Yeah,
So the story, as much as you botch it, the story remains alive today.
yeah. And so in this case, the beautiful thing, I think, the last lines, or we'll go with the last quatrain. Your stillness penetrates the storm and guides me back into your arms, creates the space to realize doubts are wasted hours we're meant to spend together under stars. The first part of the poem is I lie awake at night and count the stars that cluster, cluttering the sky and mind with numbers vast and overwhelming, right? So there's a very sort of, we could, I would say bottom up kind of approach, like let's count every star, let's try and understand everything, let's zoom in on all the details, on the particulars, but we can get lost in the particulars for a pretty long time, right? And sometimes it's, the issue isn't that there's too many details, but it's that we're forgetting the simpler truth, right? Truth at the end of the day is simple. You
Well,
know,
what
it's one thing, it has no parts. And so here, there's an inversion, I would point out, where it starts with all these parts and infinite sort of lattice work of constellations. Sorry, I'm going on. But then there's a turn here. And that's where I think the brilliance comes in.
Well, there's another subtle reference too. We were talking about mystery cults. We have a reference to astrology in the
Mm,
first quatrain. Overwhelming Mars portends debilitating doubt. In other words, I foresee what's going to happen based on the alignment of the planet Mars. And then by the time we get to the end, we have that sense of certainty we have in each other, lying, my hand in yours, lying at each other's side. So it put the human relationship, the human closeness puts the lie to these theories of planetary influences and attempts to control things and predict the future.
right. And the fault is in our stars, right? Not in
Not in our
ourselves.
stars, but in ourselves.
Yeah. So
And I
next
would
poem.
I would just add by form, this is a Shakespearean sonnet, and again, very orthodox in its rhyme scheme and structure. But it says, despite its storied structure and subject matter, it still says something new.
Well, I think that's the real, I wouldn't call it balance. Balance, I think, is a tricky word, especially today, but there's no real, on a higher epistemological level, there is no real clash between sort of, we could say tradition or orthodoxy in a certain sense. The form is there. The form is timeless. What we do with the form, how we treat a subject and use a particular form to treat it, that's infinite, right? There's only X amount of notes on a keyboard, on a piano, on a violin. That is in no way a constraint to the quality and amount of beauty that can be created, right? And I think some people, and if we're thinking in a healthy fashion, I think that becomes clear, right? The robots aren't gonna like come up with every song and then we run out of songs, you know?
Exactly. One moment.
Yeah, sure.
I want you to edit that out.
No, this is the real deal, folks. We're flesh and blood
Yeah,
and snot and everything.
allergy
Uh,
season.
which which poem did you have in mind next, Adam?
Well, we can do Michael Birch's Daredevil, which
Excellent.
is in the latest, the latest right now issue of the new Lyre.
Yes, and I get this is a good one. I get to practice because I did do this one on Twitter, but I was stuck staring at the screen, and looking down at the page, which made it more complicated. So I get to practice it again. I'm just going to look at the page for this one and let you comment. The only thing I'd say about this one, as an opener, Dana Gioia made a good point in one of his lectures that he gave years ago, where he's talking about some of the problems with modern poetics, and he was speaking especially in light of the advent of new criticism in the early 20th century, where there was really an emphasis on craft, right, poetic craft, and sort of the formalistic qualities of language and writing. But there was something lost in terms of the origins, the musical origins of poetry,
We're
right?
at 10 minutes, by the way.
Yeah, so we split these off. We're going to come back on the other side. And so I think this one is a great reminder that gets back to some of the musical roots of poetry. And right, the polemic that Dana made was that a lot of poetry in the 20th century was written with the wrong side of the brain. We're using the analytical side and we're just trying to construct language, forgetting that the musicality, right, the muses, if we will, they kind of have to guide us, and we can just sort of let it happen. So I think that's the beautiful thing about music. It has a sort of organic, natural quality that goes beyond prose, right? And so I think this is a great example. Daredevil. And as one question is, who is this written for? I guess that's the main paradox about this poem. Who is this written for? Daredevil, by Michael R. Birch. There are days that I believe, and nights that I deny. Love is not mutilation. Daredevil, dry your eyes. There are tight ropes, leaps bereave, taut wires strumming high brief songs, infatuations. Daredevil, dry your eyes. There were cannon shot soirees, hearts barricaded, wise, and then annihilation. Daredevil, dry your eyes. There were nights our hearts conceived untruths reborn as sighs. To dream was our consolation. Daredevil, dry your eyes. There were acrobatic leaves that tumbled down to lie at our feet, bright trepidations. Daredevil, dry your eyes. There were hearts carved into trees, tall stakes where you and I left childhood's salt libations. Daredevil, dry your eyes. Where once you scraped your knees, love later bruised your thighs. Death numbs all, our sedation. Daredevil, dry your eyes. Whew. This is language is admittedly intense, compelling, striking.
Very much. And to answer your question before you recited, for me, reading this, the Daredevil was the speaker talking to himself. He's talking about, and here we have the language about acrobats and tight ropes and cannon shots, and then we have references to childhood, carving hearts into trees, small acts like that, and analogized to love and love as a this type of love, especially as a feat of daring, which for all of us it kind of is. To search for love and fall in love and maintain love, it requires effort, and there's definitely emotional and sometimes physical bruises along the way. And I think, this poem does a good job of capturing that. And that little line, daredevil, dry your eyes. It's almost kind of a self admonition, man up, something akin to that. You know, you're showing your emotion when you shouldn't. Um, and showing emotion and in thinking about love or involved in love, it's only natural. Love is a strong emotion. Um, and it's almost ironic, the admonition to stifle that. You might say that this is it illustrates the conflict between the inner truth and the face that the speaker wants to present, or between objectivity and subjective emotion. There's so many different ways you can read that admonition.
There is. And on the other side of this, because I know we're gonna do the second part, Birch did tell me a bit more about this poem, so we'll get to that in a minute. So we'll let we'll just switch. We'll end this one and we'll be right back.
Uh,
I spoke with Michael Birch about this poem, and he said something interesting, which is that he actually wrote this with the idea in mind. No one he actually knew, but this is actually about uh, women or a woman in an abusive relationship, actually. And that kind of makes sense if you think about it, even with what you said, in terms of taking a risk, right? So we take a risk with love or a relationship, but then is it always love, right? Sometimes we're taking risks for something that we believe is the thing that we are after or desiring, but is it the real thing, or is it an imitation? Is it something that seems like the real thing but actually comes with a whole set of risks and all that? And I think what's interesting then is that it's a pretty dark subject, and yet the way Birch treats it, it's very compelling, and it's full of paradoxes.
well, and it shows how what germinated from an idea about abused women can be stated in a way where it's universally applicable and doesn't necessarily have to apply only to them, you know.
Right.
And I did kind of get a hint of that in reading the poem Bruised Your Heart and Bruised Your Thighs. I mean, I think that was a pretty clear reference. But again, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's an abused woman or even a woman in that instance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, it's definitely, it allows for all sorts of, yeah, it begs all sorts of different questions. Who's the daredevil? And taking all the different kinds of risks that we may take in life, and how we get bruised sometimes, right, when we take risks.
Exactly.
And so, with that, we will once again change the pace, something a little more wholesome with its own set of, shall we say, um, its own set of dangers and risk taking. So, this is called The Angel with the Broken Wing. We're going back to Dana Gioia. And this is one that I like to recite, and I think people will enjoy this one. So this is also, I found it in 99 poems. So The Angel with the Broken Wing. I am the angel with the broken wing, the one large statue in this quiet room. The staff finds me too fierce, and so they shut-face archer in this air-conditioned tomb. The docents praise my elegant design above the chatter of the gallery. Perhaps I am a masterpiece of sorts, the perfect emblem of futility. Mendoza carved me for a country church. His name's forgotten now, except by me. I stood beside a gilded altar where the hopeless offered God their misery. I heard their women whispering at my feet, prayers for the lost, the dying, and the dead. Their candles stretched my shadow up the wall, and I became the hunger that they fed. I broke my left wing in the revolution. Even a saint can savor irony. When troops were sent to vandalize the chapel, they hit me once, almost apologetically. For even the godless feel something in a church, a twinge of hope, fear. Who knows what it is? A trembling unaccounted by their laws, an ancient memory they can't dismiss. There are so many things I must tell God. The howling of the damned can't reach so high. But I stand like a dead thing, nailed to a perch, a crippled saint, against a painted sky.
Wow.
I mean, this is it's like a perfect poem right there. So
And
many
it's
contrasts.
it deals with so many things and can be read on so many levels. And I sympathize with its overarching theme completely. How many times you go to a museum and see a beautiful piece that was somewhere, in this context, it was, an altarpiece or a piece of art that was in a church somewhere. And now it's put in this air conditioned monochrome room with fluorescent lighting, very sterile, very academic. And I think the art in that context loses something. um, I'll never forget when I was in Spain, one of El Greco's masterpieces, The Burial of the Count of Orgaz, is in just a small church in the middle of Toledo. And you go in, and the church could maybe seat like 50 people. And there's the altar, and then in the vestibule you turn to the right, and there's this famous masterpiece right there. There's something about the original context that adds a life to the piece that you just don't get in the museum. Um, and I also like the little quip about broke his left wing in the revolution. That's a little. It adds a little sense of humor to an otherwise very very deep and serious poem.
Yeah, right. And that's, yeah, it is a nice touch that even in this sort of serious uh, tone or circumstance or background, that the speaker is able to remove himself even from that, as challenging as it might be, and have a bit of sense of humor and reflection, right? That the irony is not lost
Yeah.
on them. And I mean, yeah, there's so many things that we could say about a poem like that.
Two things I want to add, though, is number
Yeah.
one is the speaker here is an inanimate object. And I know that it's used often enough, but it's not as common as we might think in poems. And I think it's a degree of skill, for a poet to, or takes a degree of skill rather, for the poet to assign a narrative voice to an inanimate object. Um, and the other theme it deals with, which I think is the higher theme, or more, it speaks more towards human nature, and that's why I think it was more appropriate to close with it, is the sense that, um, no matter how much we try, human beings cannot escape the religious sentiment, and these
Mm.
feelings, these attitudes that we inherit, no matter how much we try to disown them. And in fact, that oftentimes that makes our hostility to them more bitter, is the fact that we realize we're stuck with them. Again, it just as with the road, this speaks to being part of a mystery, being carried along by a mystery, part of a mystery, something greater, over which we are not in control.
Yeah, I mean that theme comes across very beautifully and very clearly, and yet it's also, despite this idea of there being no control, what there is an ability to really unearth all the meaning and implications of the situation, and things that we might take for granted or not allow to fully hit us, right? Because maybe we don't want to accept certain things. And so a crippled saint against a painted sky, right? And it's in like almost a perfect sort of situation that's like almost in a sense it's dead, right? It's like it's very formalized, it's very Apollonian almost, right? Like a church is a thing, uh, but the spirit, right, that inhabits the people in the church may or may not be living, right? It may or may not be embodied. And so I think there is this really nice contrast between that kind of, yeah, the strict formalism and all the laws and the weight of everything that holds this angel down in a sense, but that holds any of us down, right? And at the same time, an ability to sort of step out of all of it, and to observe. And yeah, I mean, there's so much that could be said about that in terms of how it pertains to how we choose to deal with life, really, right? And saintliness, right? Sainthood, where the question of saintliness is, I mean, central to this poem, and sort of recognizing this higher lawfulness, regardless of how chaotic or unjust the world might be. What does it mean to act or to embody saintliness in even these, not just the nice situations, right, but in the more difficult ones? What do we look like in those situations? Yeah, there's a lot.
And I'll just add, this is a formal poem. It's written in quatrains in which the second and fourth line rhyme, have an end rhyme. So again, as natural as the tone sounds, it's metered and rhyming poetry.
Yeah, and I mean to great effect, right, in terms of the rhymes. Irony, apologetically, fed, dead, me, misery, gallery, utility.
Sorry.
No worries.
Is Juju okay? Did you check on her? Where is she?
Up by the stairs.
That's Johnny, everybody. Say hi to Johnny. Hi, Johnny.
Hi.
This is a meta podcast, by the way, the whole, for our audience. So, you know what? So, do we want to close her up there with a nice classic touch?
Do you want to read the Lyre?
Yeah, or did you have another one, or do we close with that?
I just had those two.
Okay.
That I read. So
yeah, let's do the Lyre. And yeah, I think you had some thoughts there. I had to stop you
yeah.
before we started the podcast. So this is from New Lyre's, I mean, we'll just call it the green issue. This is winter.
I think it's number 3, winter 2021.
It's number 2, actually. Yeah, winter 2020.
Oh, sorry, yeah, number 2.
And yeah, definitely. I mean, just for the rich translations of the Asian masters. I mean, this that alone carries the issue. But there's also a lot of bonuses, just a lot of new original material. So this is lines from Lao Lao Ting Pavilion by Li Bai, who is one of the, you know, the top Eastern masters in his virtuosity, and I think we'll see.
In older sources, his name is transliterated as Li Po, so you might know
Yeah.
him under either name.
The spring breeze knows partings are bitter. The willow twig knows it will never be green again. It's a couplet. And I'm going to read it one more time. The spring breeze knows partings are bitter. The willow twig knows it will never be green again. Now, it's just 2 lines. And I think that's actually makes for a nice contrast, right, with all the other poems that we read, where there may be a lot of things going on, but here there's not a lot to distract us, right? There's really one central theme, two central images.
Well, this poem is actually the second half of a quatrain, and I think Mr. Birch took some license in emphasizing or excising these final 2 lines, which I think stand alone quite beautifully. But the 2 lines before it would, and I'm reading from a different translation here, is what place under heaven most hurts the heart? Lao Lao Ting, for seeing visitors off. And Lao Lao Ting was a tavern where people drank. And then we have the spring breeze knows, etc. So
beautiful.
Now, if you read it, I will attempt to read it in its original.
Yay.
I am learning Chinese. I am not fluent by any means yet, but try to pay attention to something here. 天下乡新处，老老所客听，春风起别哭，不强如调情。5 syllables in each line, A B rhyme scheme. So oftentimes when Asian poetry is translated, it's done so literally, and we get the impression that Asians were, or especially Chinese verse, were free verse poets before their day. And actually, quite the opposite is true. Even if you go back to the Book of Songs and some of the most ancient poetry, it's rhyming and it's metered just like traditional Western poetry. Why? Because it has its roots in music.
Yeah, I mean, that's very useful. And I mean, the thing about the masters, right, these Eastern masters, I think it is the economy of language, right? Just the density, the metaphorical richness. And there's so much to learn there in terms of how, like there's a virtuosity, but it's not in the sense of being flashy or, just plenty of sizzle, but no steak. It's really, this is the opposite. This is really just the pure thing. And I mean, it gets at the central paradox, right, of our mortality. And I think the irony, it's not like this poem says everything, right, but it identifies one of the central paradoxes that unless we face that, right, the spring breeze knows partings are bitter, the willow twig knows it will never be green again. What happens to people who don't know when, the party's over, or when something is coming to an end, right, and they hold on, or they're not willing or ready to let go? Oftentimes that's more a source. Yeah, sure.
Give me 1 minute.
But yeah, I think it's more a source of the problems that we might face than the actual letting go, the grieving. I believe the second beatitude is, blessed are those who grieve, for they will be consoled. Now, I mean, that's just going back to this theme, right, of The willow twig knows it will never be green again. The spring breeze knows partings are bitter. How much of our Western culture is based on sort of selling people this idea of like eternal youth and eternal sort of, it's like a fake immortality, right? Because I think the real notion of immortality comes from embracing our mortality, because then we have to think about what comes beyond us, and what really has meaning beyond just our immediate interests and desires, right?
Well, if you want to, go back to the Bible, you could go to the Old Testament, the book of Ecclesiastes. There's a time for everything, a time for war, a time for peace, a time to mourn, a time to rejoice, et cetera, et cetera. And, the spring is its season and winter is its own season, and we have to act appropriately. We kind of talked about this a little bit in our last podcast with lemon soup. There's a difference between reminiscing on the lost joys of youth and trying to be young by, injecting yourself and cutting yourself and not succeeding at it. That's not living. And again, we've talked, it's not living in tune with the times, with the season. And like we've talked about, there's forces at work far beyond our control. Time and age are something we're never going to be able to control, as much as we might try.
Mm-hmm.
And so defying them is foolishness, and wisdom lies in accepting your conditions, your circumstances, destiny. It doesn't mean you just don't care about anything, but you have to realize where you are and what your situation is.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's hard to go wrong with awareness.
Yeah.
I mean, you could say, right, in these kind of things, but also it's like by spending, like the kind of transhumanist stuff that we see today, and it's all about like, from man merging with machine to all these different, it's all some way to try and sort of cheat the game of life, so-called, in a sense. And instead of focus, and a lot of the time is going into that, in whether it's in people's individual lives or as a society, which takes all the time away that could be going into actually focusing on the things that matter, right? And with a recognition of embracing our mortality, and therefore, what is it that we should really be investing in, right? In ourselves, in others, such that that will actually be the thing that has a lasting impact. So versus trying to, remake mankind and the universe into one's, arbitrary image, or Brave New World Huxleyan style thing. So, I mean, this is just 2 lines, but for me, it's kind of, as Robert Frost said, and as Dana Gioia had mentioned in one of his talks, poetry reminds us of those things that would impoverish us to forget. And sometimes I think it's these simple truths. Poetry is there to serve as a reminder of those simple truths, which transcend all the complexity and the details, which may be infinite. But poetry is there to remind us of the eternal things, right? The lasting things, and allows us to rediscover them right now.
And I think that's a good place to conclude.
I think so. So I will thank you, Adam, for joining us, and Johnny for his little brief appearance. And thank you, everybody, for listening. So we'll be back again soon. Thank you. Thank you.
All right, thank you.